Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto is one of the most formidable minds the Imperial Navy ever produced. As a teenager, he fought in the legendary Battle of Tsushima Strait in 1905, where Japan shattered the Russian fleet. Yamamoto paid for that victory in blood. He was badly wounded and lost 2 fingers. 36 years later, the same man, now an aging admiral, was handed a mission so dangerous it could either revive Japan's empire or doom it forever: strike America's Pacific naval heart at Pearl Harbor. But why would Japan gamble everything on one base? 1941 was the third year of World War II. Germany and Italy were fighting Britain, France, and the Netherlands, while America was still officially neutral. Yet in the Pacific, a storm was building and Japan was the eye of it. Japan had expanded across Asia, Korea, Taiwan, large areas of China, and built bases through Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, challenging Western colonial power. America held the Philippines, Britain held Malaysia, the Netherlands held Indonesia, and all three powers watched Japan grow and tighten the noose. In July 1941, the West slammed Japan with an oil embargo, cutting off 90% of its oil imports. Without oil, Japan couldn't keep fleets moving, planes flying, or war alive. Its reserves weren't enough for a long conflict. So Tokyo fixated on the oil-rich prize, Indonesia and Malaysia, but both were controlled by Britain and the Netherlands, Japan's enemies. To reach them, Japan had to cross a deadly obstacle: the American-controlled Philippines. Supply lines would collapse without it. If Japan wanted that oil, it first had to neutralize America's Pacific power. And that power had a name: Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor sat on the island of Oahu in Hawaii, America's Pacific fortress. Any Japanese move toward the Philippines could be strangled from here. So the Japanese plan was brutally simple: cripple Pearl Harbor, isolate the Philippines, then sweep south for oil. And the man forced to craft this plan was Yamamoto. Ironically, the same man who had warned Japan not to fight America because he knew American industry could outbuild and outlast them. Now look at the nightmare Yamamoto faced. Pearl Harbor's geography wasn't welcoming to surprise. At its center was Ford Island, surrounded by anchored ships. A narrow sea passage acted like a gate, patrolled by American warships, making a stealth naval strike almost impossible. So Yamamoto chose the only weapon that could bypass the gateway: air power. Japanese pilots trained relentlessly, using models of the base, rehearsing the angles, the distances, the timing, until the attack became muscle memory. Yamamoto stayed in Japan. The strike force was led by Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo. On 26 November, the fleet sailed from Itorofu, a frozen, remote launch point, then vanished into the Pacific under strict radio silence. The journey was about 5,000 kilometers. This was the first air fleet, with a Kagi as flagship, carrying 6 aircraft carriers supported by 23 submarines and 30 other ships. Japan had 400 planes for the operation, around 350 committed to the attack itself. Pearl Harbor, meanwhile, looked ready. America had about 100 ships and boats in the area, 59 of them heavily armed with anti-aircraft guns, including 8 battleships, the Titans of the sea. 4 submarines sat at the base. Oahu also hosted 6 military airfields with roughly 400 American planes, plus army machine guns, anti-aircraft guns, and at least 6 radars on the coastline. On paper, Pearl Harbor could bleed an attacker dry if it had early warning, and that single factor, warning, was exactly what Japan tried to erase. Yet here the story darkens. There were warnings, plenty of them. Claims exist that American intelligence intercepted and decoded large parts of Japanese communications. And US monitoring of the Japanese embassy suggested a major action was coming. Even newspapers in Hawaii carried ominous headlines. One warning Japan might strike over the weekend, even pointing toward December 7th. But no full emergency posture followed. Alerts were sent, arrived casually. One message reportedly even reached Pearl Harbor after the attack began. This vacuum-fed conspiracy theories, especially accusations that Roosevelt allowed the attack to enter the war. But most do you would believe. Historians reject that as unsupported, pointing instead to routine fatigue, too many warnings, too many false alarms, and deadly complacency. Now comes the morning that changed the world. On December 7, the Japanese fleet stopped about 370 km north of Oahu. Pilots understood the odds. Many wrote farewell letters. Some cut hair and nails, sealed them as keepsakes for families because they didn't expect to return. And then, an irony. The first shots came from the Americans. Japanese midget submarines were sent ahead to slip into the harbor. But the destroyer USS Ward spotted one and opened fire, destroying it, and sent a warning up the chain. Another alarm, filed into the same mental drawer as the earlier false ones. Nobody treated it like the opening gun of history. By the time America blinked, the sky was already moving. The planes launched in two waves, 6:15 a.m. and 7:25 a.m., about 350 aircraft, including 44 torpedo bombers and many carrying 800 kilo bombs, each plane with roughly 4 hours of fuel. At 7:02 a.m., radar at Oahu's northern tip detected a massive inbound formation, but commanders mistook it for American B-17s expected from California. Friend and foe blurred for just long enough for disaster to land. At 7:53 a.m., Japanese pilots received the coded signal, Tora, 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 Tiger, 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 attack confirmed. They split into hunting packs. One pack ripped into the airfields first, because planes on the ground can't fight back. Wheeler Field was smashed. Rows of American aircraft burned where they stood. Other airfields followed. American defenders fired machine guns and scattered anti-aircraft bursts, but the damage was limited. A few U.S. planes managed to take off and score hits, but they were outnumbered, hunted, and forced to flee or die. Then the main blow struck the harbor. At Ford Island, battleships sat like steel giants at anchor, 8 of them concentrated in one kill zone. Japanese torpedoes were dropped into the water at calculated distance, skimming in, slamming into hulls, detonating below the waterline. Then came the heavy bombs, plunging through decks toward engines and ammunition stores. One name became the symbol of the morning. USS Arizona hit and destroyed, sinking with 1,200 crews still aboard. USS Oklahoma went down too, taking 400 with it. And inside the chaos, a legend rose. Doris Dory Miller, a black sailor serving as a cook with no gunnery training, reportedly manned an anti-aircraft weapon and fired on attacking planes, earning the Navy Cross. In a moment when the base was burning and command was fractured, his courage became a permanent chapter of Pearl Harbor's human story. By 8:50 a.m., the first wave pulled back to refuel, but relief didn't arrive because at 9:00 a.m., the second wave slammed in. More airfields were hit, more ships were struck. USS California was sunk in this phase. By 9:45 a.m., the second wave also withdrew. Pearl Harbor was shattered, smoke, wreckage, twisted steel, and stunned survivors. And here came the moment that still haunts the operation. Japan had the chance for a third wave, but Nagumo ordered withdrawal. Reasons are debated, but two fears dominated: fuel constraints and the threat of an American counterattack, especially the terror of unknown carrier positions. That decision saved America's Pacific lifeline. The most critical targets, massive fuel depots, repair facilities, and the submarine base, survived. And worse for Japan, America's key aircraft carriers, Enterprise, Lexington, Saratoga, were not in harbor. Fate kept them away. Yamamoto's plan had aimed to destroy carriers above all, but fate kept them away. The result was not a decisive knockout, only a brutal opening punch. The losses were horrific. America lost 21 ships and 188 planes. 2,235 servicemen were killed and 1,143 wounded. Japan lost 29 planes, 4 submarines, and 64 men. One captured sailor became the only prisoner of war. Japan celebrated, but Yamamoto reportedly warned they had awakened a sleeping giant. In the short term, Pearl Harbor worked. Japan surged, occupying the Philippines and Indonesia. But it failed at the one goal that mattered most. It did not remove America from the war. The next day, December 8th, the United States declared war on Japan. In April, American bombers struck Tokyo, proving the distance could be crossed both ways. The war raged for 4 more years. The tide turned, and it ended with nuclear fire over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And with it, the Japanese Empire collapsed, and the architects of Pearl Harbor were hunted by history. In 1943, American fighters shot down Yamamoto's plane near the Solomon Islands, an operation the US called Operation Vengeance. In July 1944, Nagumo, surrounded on Saipan, took his own life rather than face capture, perhaps haunted by the retreat that left America's fuel and carriers alive. Pearl Harbor didn't just drag America into World War II, it reshaped Japan's future. The monarchy's power eroded. Japan's post-war order transformed so deeply that the emperor became largely symbolic. And all of it traces back to that one morning, when the Pacific sky turned black, the harbor turned to fire, and the world crossed a point of no return.